Senator, you were here today, meeting with law enforcement. Talk about what they shared with you, what that was like, what you learned.
Texas has seen the face of evil. What happened here yesterday, that there are not words to describe. A monster who comes in and murders little children. 19 little kids right across the street. Right now there are 19 families here in Uvalde that don't have their little boys, they don't have their little girls. There are 2 other families of teachers who aren't here with us anymore. This is horrific. The entire state of Texas, the entire country is horrified, is grieving. There have been too damn many of these.
Senator, well, we keep hearing from Texans, folks that we've been speaking to, Uvalde, a couple years ago in Walmart, I mean, you name it, Santa Fe. What are our leaders, folks like you, going to do? Actionable efforts to help this from never happening again?
There's a lot we need to do, and let me be clear. I've been on the ground for these tragedies one after the other. I was at Santa Fe within an hour of that shooting. I was in Sutherland Springs in that beautiful church where the lunatic murdered those innocent people. I was in El Paso, the lunatic at the Walmart. I was in Midland, Odessa with the mass murderer there. I was in Dallas with the mass murderer who targeted police officers. You know, when we were growing up, this didn't used to happen. When we went to school, maybe you might be worried about getting in a fist fight, but you didn't worry about some psychopath coming in and murdering children. What we're seeing is evil, and this is an evil that is plaguing the country now. The question is, what do you do about it? What you do about it is you stop the bad guys. You stop the criminals, you stop the felons, you stop the fugitives. In 2013, I introduced legislation. It's called the Grassley-Cruz legislation. It was designed to take the guns out of the hands of felons and fugitives and those with serious mental illnesses. It required the Department of Justice to do an audit of every federal conviction to make sure felony convictions were in the background database. 2013, the Senate voted on Grassley-Cruz. It got a majority of votes on the Senate floor, but Senate Democrats filibustered Grassley-Cruz. And they killed it on the Senate floor because they demanded 60 votes. Sutherland Springs, when that mass murder happened, that murderer there should never have been able to buy a gun. Why? Because he had a felony conviction that the Obama Air Force never reported to the background check. If Grassley-Cruz had passed, the audit had happened, his conviction would have been in the database. And another thing Grassley-Cruz required is it required the Department of Justice to prosecute felons that try to illegally buy firearms. If the Democrats had not filibustered Grassley-Cruz, there is a very good possibility that Sutherland Springs never would have happened. Let me tell you what else was in Grassley-Cruz. $300 million for school safety, additional funding for school safety. The Democrats filibustered that additional money. In 2018, following Santa Fe, I introduced legislation that said schools can use $1.3 billion in federal funds to harden schools. You want to talk about how we could have prevented the horror that played out across the street? Look, the killer entered here the same way the killer entered in Santa Fe, through a back door, an unlocked back door. I sat down at round tables with the families from Santa Fe. We talked about what we need to do to harden schools, including not having unlocked back doors, including not having unlocked doors to classroom, having one door that goes in and out of the school, having armed police officers at that one door. The legislation I introduced that would have allowed schools like this school to access grants from those $1.3 billion in federal funds, Democrats blocked it. So I got to tell you, I get tired of all the politicking. What happens every time there is a mass shooting? You have politicians, and we saw Beto O'Rourke today behaving like a peacock, behaving like a jackass at that news conference. I get that he thinks it's good politics, but the policies the Democrats are proposing, they wouldn't have stopped this crime or any others. They're not focused on stopping crimes. Their solution is to try to take away your firearms. Their solution is to try to take away the firearms of law-abiding citizens. And it doesn't work. If you want to stop crimes, disarming law-abiding citizens fails 100% of the time. And the Democrats who are out there now strutting and playing politics, just once, I want to ask the reporters, Ask a question. Why did you filibuster legislation that could have made that school more secure? Why did you filibuster legislation that would have required the Department of Justice to lock up felons and fugitives who illegally try to buy firearms?
Will you be going to the NRA convention this weekend, and what's your message going to be if you do go?
Yes, I'm going to be there. And I'm going to be there because, look, what Democrats in the press try to do in the wake of every mass shooting is they try to demonize law-abiding gun owners. They try to demonize the NRA. I'll tell you what the NRA does. It stands up for your rights. It stands up for my rights. It stands up for the rights of every American to protect their families. I'll tell you a stat from the Barack Obama White House that you may not know. Do you know how frequently a firearm is used in the United States of America to stop a crime? Defensively, to stop a crime, to save someone's life? According to the Barack Obama White House, it's used between 500,000 times and 1 million times a year. That's a lot of lives that are saved. Sutherland Springs was stopped because a hero who was an NRA rifle instructor grabbed his weapon, it was an AR-15, ran down barefoot and engaged with that psychopath mass murderer and saved their lives. And I gotta say, what happens in the wake of these horrific crimes, and by the way, the people strutting about, they haven't looked in the eyes of the families and the victims. I've been on the ground over and over again. When they try to pretend, the law-abiding gun owners, it's your fault, they're lying. They're playing politics. But the media oh so often goes, well, what a shocking thing. Would you talk to people who defend the right to defend your family? Listen, if you have kids and someone comes into your house, you have a right to defend your children. That's what the NRA defends. And so what I'm going to talk to them about is what I talk to them always about. I'm going to talk to them about evil. The evil that we saw yesterday with a vicious murderer. And I got to say, of all of the horrible things, I don't think there's anything worse on planet Earth than a monster who hurts little kids. But I'm also going to talk about the evil of the politicians who see a crime like this and immediately think, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for me as a Democrat to push my own political agenda. That's not right, and it's dishonest, and it's where there's a responsibility in the media not to just repeat the partisan lies and attacks that come from Democrats.
What's your message?
Senator, what can you do in the Senate to prevent another mass shooting from happening?
Well, there's a lot we can do, and there's a lot we need to do. In 2013, I introduced legislation called Cruz that would have required a federal audit of every federal database to make sure felonies are in the database, that would have required the Department of Justice to prosecute felons and fugitives who try to illegally buy firearms, that would have provided $300 million in federal grant funds for school safety, so a school like the one behind you could harden its facilities, could put in bulletproof doors, could eliminate, to go down to one entrance rather than having an unlocked back door, which was an invitation to a predator to murder these kids. And I got to tell you, the Senate Democrats filibustered that legislation. They stopped the funding that could have made that school safer.
But what do you do in a situation like this where this 18-year-old didn't have an adult criminal record, didn't have any history of mental illness?
Well, listen, it is early in this case. We don't know the facts right now. What law enforcement has reported, and I've sat down now with the mayor and the county judge and the sheriff and local law enforcement and the FBI and Texas DPS and state officials. This investigation is just a day into it. I'm sure we will know more about it tomorrow and more the next day and the next day after that. At this point, what law enforcement is telling us is that they are not aware of a criminal record by this defendant. And note, by the way, I said defendant. I want to encourage every one of you in the press, don't say this bastard's name. Don't repeat his name in any context. He deserves to be forgotten and to be in the 9th circle of hell. He is a shooter and a mass murderer. Right now, law enforcement says they're not aware of a past criminal history. However, he just turned 18. And what law enforcement has not ascertained yet is, did he have a juvenile criminal record? He could have. We don't know one way or the other. Often someone who commits a horrific crime like this has a long history of criminal behavior in the past? We don't know the answer to that, but we will find out in the days to come. We also don't know the answer. I've asked, was there evidence of significant mental illness? Was there evidence of his threatening others? Was there evidence in the schools? We have seen a pattern in other schools of students who threaten violence, who threaten even murder, and the schools don't report it to law enforcement. It doesn't get into the system. We don't know if that happened here, but those are all questions that are going to be asked. With many of these cases, they can be stopped. The most dangerous people are the felons and the fugitives and those with serious mental illness who repeatedly try to illegally buy firearms, and the Department of Justice won't prosecute them. They give them a slap on the wrist. So many of these crimes can be stopped by putting the bad guys in jail. There are instances, not many of them, but there are instances where someone that doesn't have a criminal history, that doesn't have a history of mental illness, nonetheless commits a horrific and unspeakable crime. And you obviously, you can't predict that if you don't have the early indicators, but what you can do, you can make the schools safer. So in the wake of Santa Fe, when we sat down with parents, when we sat down with law enforcement experts, we asked them, what do you do? And there, what the shooter did is went in an unlocked back door and was able to corner kids in a classroom and was able to get in the classroom and murder students there. And one of the principal recommendations that came out of those roundtables is a school needs to have one point of entry and one point of exit. All of the back doors, you look at this school, there's a bunch of back doors. All of the back doors need to be shut down. There needs to be one point of entry. And the single best way to protect our kids, listen, every parent, what happens here is the worst nightmare any parent can imagine. There's not a parent alive who is not terrified of the prospect of this horror. The single biggest thing we can do to protect our kids is ensure that there are armed police officers, law enforcement on campus. If you have a single door, a point of entry, and armed police officers, what would have happened here, even if it turns out he didn't have a criminal background, he wasn't here to stop him coming in the door. And he went through an unlocked back door and he made it into the classroom. If that door had been locked, he would have been stopped. If the classroom door had been locked, he would have been stopped. If you had to go through one single point of entry, with armed police officers there, they could have stopped him right there, perhaps. And that could have made a real difference. And the reason that didn't happen is in part because Democrats filibustered my legislation to provide funding for school safety. As recently as this year, they blocked a vote because they don't want solutions for this. They want a political issue to campaign on, and it's cynical. And sadly, too many folks in the media do their bidding. You know what? Whatever bill, all right, universal background checks, which is one of their favorite proposals, there is 0.0% chance it would have stopped this crime. They don't care. And for those of you in the media, don't report their empty political lies. We need to stop these crimes. And by the way, I have spent a lifetime fighting violent crime, fighting murderers, fighting rapists, fighting those who hurt kids. It is a little rich seeing Democrats who advocate abolishing the police, who support district attorneys that don't prosecute violent criminals, who give money to pay the bail money to bail violent criminals out of jail, suddenly discover they oppose violent crime. I oppose violent criminals across the board, and they ought to be in jail.